Hey gang, JP here from BigSexyBeast.com, and I've been getting a lot of questions about solar in the comments on the videos, and I promised everybody that I would try to do kind of a basics of solar video, and this is about the only way that I know how to do it, so this is kind of super data geek nerdy. I'm going to try to do just very high level, and I'll talk about kind of the full spectrum. And if you have questions, feel free to pop them into the comments down below, and or send me an email, which I'll put my email in a little bit later. So in this video, I'm going to cover what are the basic components of a solar system, how do I size my solar system, what are the different types of solar panels, what are the pros and cons and considerations for those, just a very basic wiring 101, and then kind of some extra options, getting fancy commentary. As with any of these things, a lot of this I've learned through trial and error and building systems either for myself or for others. And so do your own research and enter at your own risk, so to speak. High level, what are the basics of a solar system? And it is pretty simple if you really kind of break it down into its individual components. And so I want to kind of take some of the intimidation factor out of all of this. Most of your things that you're going to use are going to be you'll be able to do with these four components. So you have some solar panels, and there are different types. They're rigid, they're flexible, they're foldable, they're polycrystalline, monocrystalline. But in essence, you have solar panels, and that's what's going to grab light from the sun and begin to convert it into electricity. You have a battery, which is where you're going to store your power that you're generating, or it's where you're going to consume power from for your devices. And there are different types of batteries. There are lead acid, AGM, lithium, and I'll talk later about some of the pros and cons there. You got a charge controller, which in essence is the brains of the entire system. And there are different types of charge controllers. There's MPPT, there's PWM, and there are considerations there that I'll try to comment on later. But there's also a really cool function called the load circuit on these charge controllers, which can help you smartly regulate your entire system. And almost all charge controllers these days have that. And a fuse panel. Because everything needs to have a fuse on it. And so this is kind of the fundamental components. If you take out all the wires, where it kind of starts to look like spaghetti, and you start with this should help you start to take some of the intimidation out of it. Or these are your main components. And you can do this pretty cheaply. Just to kind of give you an idea, you can get solar panels for $100. You can get a battery for $100. You can get a charge controller for $50. You can get a fuse panel for $30 or $40. And so what is that? $100, $200, $250, $290. And you've got to count the basic elements of a solar system. And so for sure, under $500, you can set up a pretty functional solar system. You can spend a lot more than that on it and get a lot more complex and crazy. But these are in essence the basic components. So how do I size my solar system? This may be the first spot where it kind of starts to get a little bit more tricky. But again, if you just take it down piece by piece, it's pretty straightforward and simple. Kind of one good rule of thumb or heuristic to adhere to is that your inputs should be greater than your outputs. Meaning if you need to consume 10 watts out of your solar system, you ought to be planning on putting 15 or 20 watts into it. You always want to be slightly more in than out. Because sometimes you won't get these calculations perfect, and sometimes you use more than you think you're going to use. But first and foremost, make a list. Microsoft Excel or Google Spreadsheets is great for making a list, but guess what? A pen and paper works just fine as well. So list out all the different things that you think you might need to power from your system. Common things are going to be like your lights, your refrigerator if you're going to have one. But also don't forget things like charging your iPhone and charging your drone or charging your camera, or a water pump that's going to move water from a tank to a sink. All of those different things are going to use power, and they should make it onto your list. So first and foremost, start your list. Second, you need to write down how much current each of those devices is going to draw. And this is not that intimidating. Most of the things that you're going to buy are going to have an instruction manual. And most of the instruction manuals are going to have a section in the instruction manual called specifications. And one of the things that's going to be listed in specifications is their voltage requirements and their amperage draw. And so for something like an LED light, it's going to be very low current draw. It may be something like 0.6 amps, less than an amp. Something like your fridge, though, is going to draw a lot more power, and it might be something like 6 amps. You can probably also find cheat sheets for the amp draw for different types of devices and iPhones and stuff like that online as well. But make a list of all your items and make a list of the estimated amp draw for each of those devices in the next column. Your next column, you need to estimate how long you think you're going to use each one of these each day. So for example, an LED light that I'm going to turn on when the sun sets at 8:30, I'm going to sit around the campfire, I'm going to cook dinner, I'm going to talk to friends, and 3 hours later at 11:20, I'm going to go to bed because I'm an old man. That means I'm going to use that LED light for 3 hours a day. Something like your fridge may seem not as straightforward because your fridge doesn't run all the time. Just like your house fridge, if you listen to it, the compressor kicks on, it runs for a while, and then it kicks off, and then later it'll kick on again, and it will run for a while and then kick off. And how frequently it kicks on and how long it runs for are going to depend on how hot it is outside or how cold it is outside. But you can put some estimates in place, and you know what? Go back over time, and as you learn more, you can go back and refine them and get more accurate as you go. But think about it like this. Your fridge may kick on and run the compressor for 3 minutes, and it may do that every 20 minutes, which means that it's going to do it 3 times an hour, or 9 minutes per hour, and in 12 hours it's going to do that 108 minutes for 12 hours, because typically your fridge is going to run more in the daytime than it does at night because it's warmer during the day than it is at night, or 1.8 hours during the daytime is how long your fridge is going to run all those different times it kicks on and off. So you do that for each one of your different devices that you're going to be powering from your system. In your next column, then, you're going to simply multiply your current draw times how many hours a day that you think you're going to have it on. So for example, our LED light example, 0.6 hours. It's going to run for 3 hours a day, which means I'm going to use about 1.8 amp hours. My fridge uses a lot more power. It's going to pull 6 amps times that 1.8 hours during the daytime, which is 10.8 amp hours, quite a bit more. To put it in perspective for you, a typical car battery is probably going to be around 50 amp hours to 60 amp hours, which means that you could run that light for several days before it runs your battery down. But your fridge probably can't run for more than about a day or so before it runs your battery down. So that's kind of how we're now starting to size the system, is we're looking at the sum total of all of these different devices and their amp hour draw, and we're comparing that to the amp hour rating on our battery. And that's kind of telling me, is my battery big enough to support what I want to do? There's some other considerations, like lead acid batteries. You should only use 50% of the rated capacity. So if it's a 100 amp hour battery, you should only use 50 amps of that. But again, if you got questions about that, throw them in the comments below. JP, you're talking to me about amp hours, but my solar panel that I'm wanting to order is 100 watts. So I don't know, how do I connect those dots? And it's pretty simple and straightforward. Effectively, your amps times your volts is equal to your watts. And in most of your car systems, you're talking about roughly 12 volts. It could be more, it could be less, depending on what's going on. But in essence, you take your 10.8 amp hours, you multiply that by your 12 volts, and that means you get 129 watt hours. That doesn't mean you have to have a 129 watt solar panel. What it means is that you have to have a 100 watt solar panel that gets at least an hour and 30 minutes worth of sun a day, because every hour it's going to generate 100 watt hours. And so, even with a 20 watt solar panel, if I had 6 hours or 7 hours of solid sun, which you're never going to get, but let's just say hypothetically you did, a 20-watt solar panel in 7 hours of solid sun would power that fridge. But again, never plan on getting full sun all the time because we all know clouds happen. But that's kind of high level how you kind of begin to size your battery and begin to size your solar panel. Next, you've got solar panel types, pros and cons, and I'm not going to get into monocrystalline, polycrystalline, and all of those different types of solar panels, flex versus rigid. I'm just going to kind of talk about mounting configurations. On the left-hand side here is my Tundra that you've seen in some of the videos. It has a fixed 200-watt solar panel on top of it. The pros to that are it's always there, it's always on. I can pull into a Walmart parking lot and be making power while I'm in picking up supplies to head back out into the woods. And that's really, really nice. I can also park the truck and go for a hike and not really worry about anybody stealing that solar panel. It could happen, but I don't really worry about that if I go for a hike or go fishing and I leave the truck, because it's fixed mounted to the truck. It's almost invisible. If you're standing on the ground, you really don't know it's there, and it's always making power. The downside to that fixed 200-watt solar panel I have on the left on top of my Tundra is that I like to camp in places that are really far off the grid down a four-wheel drive trail and surrounded by trees, which means it's surrounded by trees, especially this time of year. They've got leaves. I'm not getting a lot of sun, which means I'm not making a lot of power. So that's probably one of the biggest downsides to the fixed solar panel. Next one is I kind of have to plan ahead about how I want to park my truck to make sure that I get sun. And I may have to leave my truck in the sun rather than putting it in a nice cool spot, out of the sun. On the right-hand side, that is a picture of my FJ and Teardrop on the Magruder Trail between Montana and Idaho a couple of years ago. And you notice that pink purpley thing hanging down the side of the FJ there. That is a folding solar blanket that I can roll up anywhere and just unfold. And if the left side of my truck is in the sun, I put it on the left side. If the right side of my truck is in the sun, I put it on the right side. If I want to park the FJ under a bunch of trees and there's a sunny spot 15 feet away and camp, I can put it in that sunny spot and run a cable to it. And so I've got a lot of options for where I deploy that and to make the most of my setting and situation. The downsides are that fixed solar panel on top of the Tundra for 200 watts is less than $200. That 120-watt folding blanket that's hanging there on the FJ is about $1,600. So it is at least 8 times more expensive for less wattage on the FJ folding panel. The other thing too is I would not go off and go hiking or go fishing and leave that solar panel hanging on the FJ, because there's a good chance when I come back it's not going to be there. The other downside to it is that when I get out, I have to think about setting up my solar panel. So it's not always on, it's not always making power. And in my earlier example, if I run into Walmart to resupply before heading out in the woods during that time, I'm not making any power. For my trip this summer, if you watch that planning video that I just recently did, you notice that in addition to having that fixed panel on top of the Tundra, I've also got the folding blankets with me, so that I've kind of got the ability to do both. I can be always on when I need to be, and then if I roll into a spot where I'm either not making enough power or I need to get a blanket out in the sun, I can put it out there. So there is a spot for both, and you can kind of design your system around your needs and where you're going to be camping and those types of things. But high level, that's kind of some of the main things to think about on solar panels. Again, panel chemistry and some of that kind of stuff. You can get as complex on this stuff as you want, but pretty basic and simple, fixed versus folding. Wiring 101, this is probably where folks get the most intimidated and can be the most complex, but just to give you some kind of simple guidelines and rules of thumb here. First and foremost, always use a fuse. You can start a fire, and fuses will help protect you from that, especially on those longer wire runs where you're trying to come from a solar panel down along the frame through who knows what to get into your camper or your car or whatever. Fuses matter. Use them. Also, you can't just use any wire. Your wire needs to be sized to your current draw. So for example, in our previous example where our fridge was going to draw 6 amps, we have to use a certain gauge of wire for the length of that run. And I put on the right side of the slide here, this is a amp draw versus length versus gauge chart. You can Google these, or you can download this document. There's tons of them out there. But in essence, what this is like, this old Rand McNally road maps where you want to look up the mileage between two cities. If I want to run 0 to 20 amps, like my fridge example, 6 amps, 0 to 20 amps, and I want to run that 4 feet, I can use a 12 gauge wire. If I want to go 4 to 7 feet, I can also use a 12 gauge wire. But the moment that I hit more than 13 feet on a 20 amp draw, I need to go up to a 10 gauge wire. I need a bigger wire because the wires have basically internal friction that causes my voltage to drop, and the wire can overheat. And so this is important. Size your wires to your current draw. It's not hard if you take the time to do it, and this chart will help you. But definitely size your wires to your current draw. Make sure you leverage that load feature on your solar controller. It will protect your batteries. Most of your solar controllers are basically going to have 6 screws or wire terminals on them. Positive and negative for the battery, positive and negative to your solar panel, positive and negative to your load circuit. If you take the positive and negative of your load circuit, and that's what goes into your fuse panel, and all of your accessories then come into your fuse panel, guess what? When your battery gets too low, it will cut off the load circuit, which means it cuts off the fuse panel, which means it cuts off all the things that are drawn from your battery, and you probably will still be able to start your car. So that's it's kind of a freebie out there on most solar controllers that you should take advantage of. So extra options and getting fancy, I mean, you can go crazy with this, and you can charge your batteries in different ways and all these different things. But just some kind of key things that are going to come up. Everything that I've talked about so far has been mostly focused on 12-volt appliances, a 12-volt fridge, 12-volt lights. But there's going to be times when you want to charge a laptop, or you want to charge a drone battery that uses a plug like in your house. Your car is roughly 12 volts. Your house is roughly 120 volts. That's a different type of system. One's direct current, one's alternating current. And so then that's where you get into needing an inverter. And the minute you start looking at inverters, you're going to start to see things like modified sine and pure sine. Simple cheat sheet on that is modified sine is going to be a lot cheaper, but not good for some devices. And a pure sine is going to be more expensive, but much more like the power in your house. And so you'll want to do some research on whether your equipment will run off of a modified sine or if it requires a pure sine inverter. I mean, if you're going to be running a microwave in the backcountry, you're going to want a pure sine inverter. But if you're going to be charging a drone battery, you probably can get away with a modified sine inverter. People are going to freak out when I say that because they typically say sensitive electronics, you want pure sine. Just do your own homework. I personally charge my drone batteries off of a modified sine inverter a lot, and I'm not seeing any issues with them, but I'm not recommending that. Do your own homework. Battery voltage monitor. In essence, what this thing does is it measures everything going into your battery and everything coming out of your battery through something called a shunt, and it tells you, hey, you've got 98% of your battery left, or hey, you've got 28% of your battery left. It's effectively how your iPhone works. Is all that current draw in and out is being measured across a circuit where it can give you a more accurate estimate of how much of your battery is remaining. These things are exceptionally useful when you first build your system because you're going to want to know and kind of understand where you're at in charging. They can be expensive, a couple $100 as an add-on to your system. I will tell you that after you've had them for a while, they become much less relevant. They were super important to me when I first built my system or systems, but once you kind of learn your system, you get to where you really don't pay attention to them much at all. And so, weigh that out in your mind about whether it's got a cool factor to it, but if you're trying to build a system on the cheap, it's not something you absolutely have to have. And I'll show you a different way to do it at the end here. On your solar charge controllers, your biggest decision is probably going to be MPPT versus PWM, and then it's going to be manufacturer. I like Victron a lot, and PWM is cost effective, and MPPT is more efficient. So you'll get more power into your batteries on the same day out of an MPPT controller than you will a PWM, but it's going to cost you 4 or 5 times as much for the charge controller. And I have both on my on Agnes. If you watch the van life video I did out there on the old RV that we've got, I've got a PWM controller. On my FJ, I've got a PWM controller on there. I like the solid state simplicity of it. On the Tundra, I've got a fancy MPPT controller. And so both will absolutely get the job done. They just do it in different ways with different efficiencies and different price points. On batteries, a lot of different batteries, but kind of 3 big categories. Lead acid, that's your typical old car battery or deep cycle battery. An AGM battery, absorbed glass matte, which is a little bit more rugged, in some cases a little bit better suited for solar because it likes to be charged slowly, which solar does a good job of. And then lithium, which is going to be your most expensive but your most lightweight, and you're going to be able to draw more current from it and do it for a longer period of time and a larger number of cycles. And you could do a whole video on different battery types and choices. I will say that I've got some lead acid batteries in solar applications that I have really, really good luck with. And lead acid is relatively cheap. 100 amp hours is about $100, and you can abuse the heck out of it. And you know what? If the battery goes bad, you go buy another $100 battery, as opposed to buying a $1,000 lithium-ion battery. But if weight is a consideration, lithium-ion is significantly lighter for the same capacity. So something to think about. Kind of last thing to think about here is a bonus round. I talked about battery voltage meters. You can estimate it. It's directional, but you can estimate it based off of your voltage. So if you've got one of those cigarette lighter plugs that tells you the voltage of your car, your engine's turned off and it's reading 12.6, you're probably pretty close to fully charged. If it's reading 12.06, you're probably pretty close to using 50% of your battery. It does depend on temperature, and it does not work under load. What I mean by that is you could be near full on your battery, and when your fridge kicks on and it's pulling that 6 amps, it might read 12.3 volts and look like you only have 70% left when you've got a lot more than that left. And the reason that is that the voltage drops under current load, and so this is a good way to eyeball how much is left in your system when nothing's running to kind of get a sense of where you're at. And you can print this chart out and tape it to the wall of your camper and have a pretty good idea of where you're at. So I will put this document out on the website as a blog post. It'll take me a little bit to do that, but you can go out there and download it, and you're welcome to it. It'll be out there as a blog post. You're welcome to email me. Probably the most efficient ways to put comments in this video, and I'll respond to those. And I'll do my best to answer your questions. If I can't answer them, I'll tell you I can't answer them. So hopefully this is helpful, and I'm happy to go into more detail in any one of these areas. If you would like, please put those comments down below, and we'll make this kind of an evolving series. Thanks, everybody.